Good evening, everyone. My name is John Takes, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Booksellers. It's such a pleasure to welcome you all here to the hybrid event this evening. So hello to everybody here in the Atrium, and hello to all watching on YouTube now and in the future. We're broadcasting tonight from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of Canada, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Deadwood people, in the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself is located on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Bruce Creek. We are here tonight to celebrate the publication of the book Prodigies by Bob Armstrong, published by 5 Star and Gale. Applaud. This event is, of course, being co-presented by our good friends at the Winnipeg International Writers Festival as part of Thin Air 2021, and you'll be hearing from a representative of the festival later on this evening. Before we get underway with tonight's actual event, I just wanted to go over a few very quick housekeeping notes. The first thing I'll ask is that while you are in the space, we just ask that you please all continue to wear your masks. This is the performance space. So when we do, at the end of the event, take Bob to a table beside the cash desk where he will be signing books, we'll ask you all to remain in place for 1 moment, at which point you will join us in the retail space, where you will continue to wear masks, but I'm afraid once you pass that wall, you must also socially distance as well. So we'll just be socially distancing within the line. Other than that, there will be time for a Q&A following the conversation as well. During that Q&A, rather than have everybody share exactly the same microphone, which seems like a poor idea, I will instead just be asking you to tell me questions, which I will then repeat into this microphone for the benefit of all those in the room and for the benefit of all those watching as well. If you are watching on YouTube and would like to chime in, please do just place your question in the chat, and we'll be sure to bring that up as well. Please feel free to say anything positive that might occur to you over the course of the evening. But that's more than enough for me. Right now, I'd like to introduce your host for tonight, somebody who I'm always delighted to have. Sue Sorensen is a poet, novelist, and English professor at Canadian Mennonite University. She has provided me with a very humble one-line bio, but I will say that she is also the author of The Caller, A Large Harmonium, and the editor of West of Eden. She is a tremendous writer, and I'm so excited to hear the questions that she has Bob this evening. So please join me in welcoming Sue Sorensen.
Thank you so much, John. This is my first in-person book launch in a very long time. It's pretty exciting to do this and strange at last. I did take in lots of online book launches in the past year and a half. Well, good evening. Let me tell you a little bit about Bob Armstrong. I first was aware of Bob about 10 years ago when his first book, a comedy called Adolescence, was published. I brought out a book about the same time, which someone decided was also a comic novel, and both Bob and I were invited to be part of the Winnipeg Comedy Festival that year. As I recall, we both had noon-hour gigs reading to people at the Millennium Library, who were mostly puzzled by what we were doing there. I definitely recall that neither of us were paid anything for this, although I do think I got a comedy festival t-shirt. No one has ever again asked me to be part of the comedy festival. But Bob has continued to entertain in this manner. His book, Adolescence, was originally a fringe play that he had created, and he's done stand-up comedy since then. And I now know Bob a lot better because we're part of the same writing group, which ostensibly meets once a month to read and comment on one another's work. This group of writers, I think, has been important to Bob, and as it has been to me. The support and advice has been tremendously helpful. A while ago, this group acquired the name the Cattywumpuses. I think I named the group, and I have no idea what it means. Anyways, a warm thank you to them. And we have Richard Zarek here tonight, so it's good to have one of our Cattywumpuses. And Josiah and Brenda and Byron and Lauren have also been good cohorts. When a Cattywumpus brings out a book, we like to come here to take a copious amount. So because we've been in this group together, I've come to have a pretty good knowledge of Bob's work. What I've noticed that Bob can write anything. Speculative fiction, comedy, autobiography, crime drama. He's written a mitt full of plays. I'd say he has a taste for the surreal, but surrealism with its more or less on the ground. He's made his living as a speechwriter, a journalist, a freelance writer. He writes the Winnipeg Free Press weekly book news column, Paper Chase. Become a specialist in writing environmental reports. And now, what the heck, he seems to have written the Western. So that's a quick overview of Bob Armstrong, the writer. Perhaps what else you'd like me to tell you or not tell you about himself. He was not terribly forthcoming, telling me only that he nearly fell off the first horse he rode, and that his first literary work, unpublished, in 1969, was like Prodigies tonight, about 3 young adventure-seeking kids, illustrated by himself. He did fail to find a publisher back then in 1969. That's all I got from Bob. So I will round out my introduction by saying this. Bob Armstrong is a good friend, a generous, supportive presence to a whole lot of people, writers and non-writers alike here in Winnipeg. A guy who will, in his determined way, make something a positive experience when it doesn't look that way at all. And someone who knows a whole lot about a whole lot of things. So everyone, I'm so happy to introduce you to the author of Prodigies, Bob Armstrong.
Said we can take our masks off when we talk. Since it's a Western, I thought I'd first try this effect. Spoiler alert, there is at least one robbery in the book, so, you know, I'm kind of prepared. So I'm going to start, I'm going to tell you briefly a little bit about the book to set up a reading. I'm going to do like 2 short readings. There are 3 main protagonists in Prodigies. I've called it a Western, but it's also sort of Eastern because it takes about 1/3 of its length to get west of Mississippi. It starts in New York, Tennessee, and Rockford, Illinois. So 3 young protagonists, each with a special gift, who make their way west to Deadwood in what's now South Dakota. So I'm going to introduce you. I've got some readings online. They'd introduce you to all of the characters. Daniel McCormick, street kid in New York with uncanny, fast hands and acute vision, makes him a natural to be a gunslinger. Lincoln Henry, young man in Tennessee, son of 3 slaves, construction, failed Reconstruction era. He has an uncanny knack for geometry and mathematics, and for engineering inventor, and a young woman named Lily. And I'm going to read you, I'm going to read you the section where we introduce Lily and her special talent. Lily is an orphan, brought up in the circus. She doesn't think, so far she doesn't seem to have any particular gift, any particular talent. So all she can think, or all the circus can think to do to employ her, is have her do a variety of folk dances and the circus acts, which is not particularly good at. So she takes some time to practice on her own, hoping that this will bring her steps up. Lily found a quiet place in an alley behind the lodging house where she shared a room with Madame Mystère. Maybe if she worked through the steps slowly by herself, she'd feel more confident when she stood in the parlor and practiced with Mr. Zabo, the circus's accordion-playing clown. Lily closed her eyes and began humming Loch Lomond. It was nearly knocked to the ground by a furry projectile. She opened her eyes to see a pair of mongrel dogs. The dog that had struck her was some mix of terrier and bulldog, low to the ground, but powerful in the chest and legs, and equipped with a wide jaw and thick neck. From its mouth, a live rat dangled. Rounding the corner of the alley and coming at the terrier was some kind of sheepdog, long-legged, built for speed, but strong enough to fend off predators. The pursuer caught up with its shorter quarry and pounced, and the 2 animals hit the paving stones in an explosion of fur. A hideous chorus of snarls erupted from the 2 animals. the terrier uttering its muted noises through clenched jaws that held tightly with the shivering rodent. With the terrier unable to fight back without losing its prey, the sheepdog went on the attack, sinking its teeth into the muscled back of the shorter animal. Lily recoiled in horror and moral outrage. The sheepdog was being an utter brute. "You stop that this instant," she shouted. She stepped forward, waved an admonishing finger at the taller animal. The sheepdog released its tail. The terrier growled at it. "Now, which of you caught the rat?" Both dogs looked away. "You couldn't both have caught it." He continued. "Well, all right. You flushed it from hiding, the terrier, and you caught it. So you both have a share in catching it, and you can both have a share in eating it." The dogs looked up at Billy. "No, there's no point complaining. It's only fair." The rat, noticing the lull in activity in the dogs, renewed its wriggling attempts to escape. It backed out from the terrier's slackened grip and launched itself along the broken cobblestones. But with a word of warning from Lily, the faster sheepdog pounced, holding the rat firmly by its long, leathery tail. Lily detested rats after one night many in lodging houses infested with the creatures, called the sheepdog to her. "You'd better finish off that rat if you don't want it getting away. Smash its head against the paving stones." She mimed the action to the animal as if she were holding the rat's tail with her own teeth and swinging the rodent onto the ground. That's not in the book. The dog seemed to nod and began to do the same, once, twice, 3 times, until the rat's skull shattered. After a few more words from Lily on dividing the spoils, the 2 dogs took turns taking bites from the bleeding carcass, then began to walk off side by side. "No more fighting for you 2, Lily said. "There are plenty of rats to go around." As the dogs trotted away, all signs of aggression gone, Lily heard the sound of playing cards. She turned to see Uncle Stanislas practicing fancy card shuffles. He didn't look as cross as Lily expected. "I was practicing, Uncle Stanislas. I got interrupted." "Practicing what?" "My dance." "My Lillian is no dancer." No, Uncle, I can learn to be a dancer." "No, Lillian is..." Uncle Stanislas pursed his lips and furrowed his brow. Then he smiled again. "Lillian is dog girl." No, Lillian is canine child." "Is no matter. We find you name, but first we find you dogs." So that's our first introduction. That's our first introduction to Lily, who then indeed goes on to be a circus performer with a special dog act, which will come into play later on in the novel. And now I'm going to bring you back to one of the other 2 main characters, Daniel, who I said has rapid hand-eye coordination, which makes him a natural to be potential gunslinger, also gets him into a certain amount of trouble. So in this scene, we encounter him, he's behind bars. And this introduces another important character in the book who will become Daniel's best friend and, well, as in any good Western, his sidekick. "Faith and begorra, 'tis just like the old sod, is it not? Seamus O'Finnegan Flanagan." Daniel looked up from the bucket of seed potatoes and saw Seagull grinning at him. The wiry, dark-haired boy placed his hat over his chest, gestured to the rows of potatoes awaiting planting, and proclaimed, "Me Irish heart loves me spuds." Roth and Wiseman guffawed at Seagull's performance. Daniel's supposed Irishness was a frequent subject of mirth with the 3. Seagull often cracked jokes at Daniel's expense, telling the boy to throw a brick of turf on the fire or asking to borrow Daniel's shillelagh. Daniel took Seagull's mockery as a playful expression of friendship, but he also knew Seagull directed Irish jokes his way because Daniel was a safe target. The other Irish boys at the reformatory banded together as the Brickbat Boys and were the fiercest gang in the joint. So this was Seagull's only opportunity to tell Irish jokes without sparking a gang war. Daniel had been barred from admission to the Brickbat Boys shortly after arriving at the reformatory, when one of the gang members recognized Daniel from his time living on the streets of the 5 Points. "Watch out for this one," the boy had said. "If he's as crazy as his ma, he's after biting you like a dog." Daniel, just starting to grow out of his little boy's body at age 13, had pounced on the larger boy and bloodied his nose before the other Brickbat Boys could intervene. That had attracted the attention of the Screws.
who arrived just as Daniel's tormentor produced a shiv made from a sharpened, straightened bed spring wrapped with old rags for a handle. The boy with the shiv, one of the leaders of the Brickbat boys, got a week in the hole and a month of extra duty. When he came out, he pronounced Daniel a snitch. That might have been the beginning of a very difficult time at the Yonkers Industrial School for Boys, a time punctuated by slips on the stairs and accidents in the wood shop and by trips to the infirmary, if Siegel hadn't come forward and announced that Daniel was in fact his long-lost cousin Hyman, last seen when he was kidnapped by gypsies in Ruthenia. As such, Daniel came under the protection of Siegel, which didn't count for much, and of Roth and Wiseman, which counted for a great deal more given Wiseman's massive physical presence and nickname, the Giant, and the reputation of Roth's fists, which, combined with his cold, unblinking eyes, had given him the nickname, the Cobra. Realizing the protection Siegel's story gained him, Daniel had given thanks for his dark hair and brown eyes, the combination often referred to as Black Irish. Privately, Siegel explained that he'd seen Daniel with Mrs. Kleinschmidt and figured, Irish or not, anybody who had an in with the queen of the fences was worth protecting. Being under Siegel's protection did not spare Daniel from Siegel's lacerating humor, as he had been reminded throughout the morning's labors in the potato field. In truth, Daniel didn't mind the Irish jokes on such a grim gray morning in early March, as they worked a mulch of straw and manure into the cold, heavy soil and buried hundreds of seed potatoes. Anything to lighten the mood was welcome. When I was 21, Siegel warbled in imitation of an Irish tenor, I rambled across the bog, but I ate a bad potato, so I stopped to drop a log. You want to be a singer when you get out of here, Siegel? Siegel grinned. Nah, any old stiff can sing. I'm going to be the master of ceremonies, the guy that keeps the show going, tells jokes between the acts, keeps everybody buying drinks, having a good time. He's the guy who makes or breaks a show. He might even end up owning the joint. I'll let Mrs. Kleinschmidt know that. Maybe she'll set you up. Yeah, but tell her no Bowery dive. I want a place with crystal glasses and a French maitre d'. So that's Daniel. Siegel. You can meet Lincoln, the other one of the three main characters, in one of my readings online, where I talk about a whole other aspect of the book. There's lots of different aspects to talk about. But right now, I'm going to bring Sue up here and see what she wants me to talk about. I guess I put this on. I don't know. Just want to make sure I'm crossing my eyes and dotting my T's.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that reading. I've read the whole book, and probably Rosemary has. I don't know who else has. Before I ask you a few questions, I want to give you an opportunity to thank Rosemary, because you always want to thank your wife, because it's very, very important to thank your wife.
Yes, Rosemary, thank you very much. She's actually the trip planner, and a number of ideas in this novel came from trips we went on. And if it hadn't been for Rosemary, we wouldn't have gone to Deadwood, and Deadwood wouldn't have ended up being the location for the last 2/3 of this book. So, and in fact, when we were in Deadwood, we went to the bar where Wild Bill Hickok was shot, and they do a daily reenactment of his shooting. And at the point when they said, does anybody want to volunteer to help out in our production today? I felt my right arm all of a sudden. And next thing you know, I was playing the bartender. So thank you, Rosemary, for that and many more things.
Anybody else you want to thank?
Well, of course, the members of the Cattywampuses. All the members of the writer group have read various chapters here and there. So some parts of this would have been familiar to Richard and Sue and the other folks. And some parts I'm sure they were wondering, okay, where's it going from here? Ah, that's where it's going from here. So yes, thank you for everything along the way.
I want to start with a question about genre. So you know, the Western genre has all sorts of stuff attached to it. This isn't only a Western. I mean, it's more complicated than that. But I would also say that because it's got kids in it, that people will perhaps assume or ask you if it's a young adult novel. So I just want to get you to talk about genre a little bit.
Yeah, so I'd say I divide my reading time between genre stuff, Western, crime, historical fiction, and what we call literary fiction, and also nonfiction. So, you know, I'm fairly promiscuous in my reading habits. Since I've been working on this, Western, either Western fiction or history of the Old West has probably been a quarter to a third of my reading. So it is a genre that I follow closely, and I'm fascinated by the use of the different tropes and standard scenes and just different things that come up a lot in genre. I like the use of language. I like the setting. And one thing I like about the Western is it takes place in a period when so much of the modern world we know today was really created. It has roots in that time. Popular culture really came about at that time in a lot of ways. Popular myths and legends, because this was the time of the dime novels that created legendary heroes. They have a lot of roots in that time. The fortunes that are with us today, I mean, you think the Rockefeller Foundation is still around. Well, that was then. So much of the modern world was created at that time. So it's a really fascinating period that crystallized the world as we know it. So.
Yeah, and as far as the young adult thing goes, I mean, I think that there isn't a lot of difference nowadays between young adult fiction and adult fiction, except perhaps it's a little more straightforward, but it's not any more intelligent or sophisticated, and often it just has young protagonists.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted this to be potential. Well, that it could be marketed as young adult. I'm not sure, you know, how many young adult readers are there out there who are interested in the economic depression of 1873 and the robber barons and you know, Reconstruction and all the different themes that come together in this? No, but if there are, but certainly in writing it, I had that in mind. I mean, I had some scenes where I pulled back a bit in the writing. My editor urged me to, and I said, yeah, I guess she's got a point. You know, when I had one character thinks back to his time in the Civil War, and it was a particularly horrific experience. So I kind of made that a little less graphic than it might have been otherwise, so that to help it potentially have that market.
Yeah. These kids, I mean, the title Prodigies is these three kids all have special gifts, you know, sort of verging on the supernatural,
yeah.
but with, you know, more or less sort of rational explanations. And about halfway through the book, I mean, one of them comes across this word prodigies. We are prodigies, we are special, we have prodigal gifts, we're not freaks, which is what they've previously worried that they are, or perhaps have been called. So I'm just wondering how you know, how and when you came across this concept of the prodigy.
Well, it's kind of weird, because I think when I first had the idea, somehow I thought of a superhero Western, which is kind of strange for me because I don't really watch a lot of superhero movies. The last one I saw probably was that Batman one with Bane, you know, the one who's been for death all the time. You know, Batman's superpower is he can understand that. Anyway, so was that 10 years ago. But still I had this idea, superheroes in the West. And I was particularly thinking young X-Men, because in the X-Men movies, it's all about the persecuted mutants. So I thought of gifts, but I don't like the aspect of superhero stories where it's basically magic. Like I'm kind of anti-magic. So I want things to be more or less naturalistic. So yeah, they seem to have prodigious gifts, but within the Western genre, Daniel's hand-eye coordination, though it would be, I think, impossibly acute, we would probably all agree, is no more acute than any other gunslinger in a Western legend. You know, when they throw a silver dollar up in the air and shoot it like that, nobody could really do that. So within that context, that's possible. And Lily's bonding with dogs is maybe a bit more than we would consider believable in a purely realistic fiction. But in the 19th century, this is the beginning time of psychology. and doctors of psychology were willing to accept ESP and communing with the dead. So who's to say the mind didn't have those magical powers if you were a person in 1870s? You know, they might believe that was totally rational. And Lincoln's ability is probably the least magical of them all. He is a person with just you know, he's just a natural genius who is particularly gifted at seeing how things work and how things fit together.
Lincoln is a particular favorite of mine. I mean, he can visualize lines and numbers, you know, any kind of mechanical thing. Lincoln is a favorite. This has a really large cast. I mean, you've been talking about the three kids who we watched grow up over several years. And I believe we will see them again, because I think this is going to turn into a series. You're working on a sequel, I think.
That's the goal.
Yeah. But the cast of characters is much larger than this, and I'm just wondering how you kept track of it, because it really is quite, you know, almost Dickensian. You know, there are a lot of characters here.
Yeah. Well, I wrote it, well, chapter by chapter, and very much. Okay, I'm doing a Daniel chapter, I'm doing a Lincoln chapter, I'm doing a Lily chapter. And initially it was very much like that. It was Daniel, Lincoln, Lily, Daniel, Lily, Lincoln, Lily. Oh, I screwed up just saying that, right? So it gets confusing. And so then you get familiar with the cast in each section. So if it's a Daniel chapter, you've got various people from the New York underworld that he encounters. And so bit by bit, you get to know them. If it's a Lily chapter, you've got the circus people. If it's a Lincoln chapter, you've got his family, and eventually his mentor, that he's apprenticed to, the people he works with. So I would be able to keep it straight just by remembering which kind of chapter I'm working on, I guess. When it really got confusing was when they all ended up in the same place at the same time. And then it's like, okay, does this person know this person yet? And then it was hard to keep straight. I didn't use charts and graphs. I probably should have, but.
As I was going to say, did you have like little index cards that things taped to your wall?
Yeah, that might have helped. It might have gone a lot faster if I had done something like that. I remember if I writing with Richard is a very methodical person. He's told us about his approach, and he has an outline for each chapter. And I might have been holding this event 3 years ago if I had taken that approach.
You mentioned a few moments ago the interest of looking at this era of North American history, 1870s, when so many things that we now enjoy or not about popular culture happened, and a lot of our industrial world and so on. And at the heart of this is Lincoln's skill with a thing that's called the steam wagon. In you know, he's skilled with steam, so we see him working with all sorts of, you know, steam drills and steam things, and he and his mentor create this steam wagon, which is then weaponized, which was fascinating because, I mean, we're using this word all the time, weaponized, where things that we didn't think would become weapons suddenly are weapons. So this steam wagon, which they thought would be useful in mining, suddenly is weaponized. And you never use the word tank, but I'm assuming that's what I was supposed to visualize. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Something like a tank?
I would think so, yeah.
So just, you know, and again, I'm wondering how you settled on that, because it is a really fascinating invention. And this kid is both really great at inventing this and finessing it, but then he's horrified, of course, when he realizes what the bad guys want to do with it. But yeah, so how did you come across the steam wagon as an idea?
Well, like my pal T.S. Eliot, I believe that great artists steal. I think that's a quote attributed to him, or he said something very much like that. Many other people have said that. Anyway, there was a Western in 1966 or 67, John Wayne, Kirk Douglas, and a very young Bruce Dern called The War Wagon. And that must have stuck with me. Now, The War Wagon was not a steam engine. It was an armored stagecoach. And basically this movie, The War Wagon, was a caper movie. A bunch of outlaws who were kind of good guy outlaws decide they're going to rob the gold from a bad guy gold miner, and they come up with a scheme to rob the war wagon. And so the idea I guess I just sort of notched that up. Okay, if it's still pulled by horses, it's still vulnerable. And before before that, when Rosemary and I, another one of these trips she organized, Rosemary and I were in a gold mining town called Jerome, Arizona. I was thinking of this superheroes in the Old West concept, and I was visualizing all of the steam machinery. Like in a gold mine like that, you'd have all these powerful steam-powered water pumps so that you could keep mining to drain the water out, and just all kinds of other steam belching things. I was just imagining the atmosphere, big clanking machinery and steam puffing out. So I'm thinking steam, I'm thinking machinery, and then I remember that Western, the War Wagon, and I guess I slammed the two together and came up with the whole subplot of the, what do I call it again? The steam wagon.
You call it the steam wagon.
The steam wagon, yeah.
But I kept calling it a tank. In my,
Yeah. Which apparently was a code word when it was being developed. I thought, but I could be wrong. If anybody knows more military history than I do, but I think it's a code word that stuck. Anyway, I didn't know.
Clearly, Bob has done a lot of research for this book. When you read it, like the verisimilitude, the details are really incredible. So I just want, how did you go about doing this research? I mean, besides looking things up on the internet like everybody else and doing travels with Rosemary. But yeah, I mean, did you have a process, or did it happen in a more accidental way?
It was the travel started a lot of it, and then the travel prompts reading, and then the reading was chaotic. Some of the initial research, actually, if I go back to the prehistory of this, I wrote a play around 2007, around 2008, 2009, about Louis Riel's time in the US in the 1870s. He actually met with President Grant and a prominent senator. He was trying to get backing for an armed uprising in what's now Western Canada, and fascinating story. So I had the idea of writing a play about that time. And as I said in one of my videos online, there wasn't a lot of call in the theater world for a play that was like a Canadian Heritage Minute on acid. It took a lot of weird turns. It was a little bit of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and a little bit of Canadian Heritage Minute, and a little bit, well, anyway, it was weird. But the research for that just spun out of control. I mean, I read books about the Pinkertons. I read Gangs of New York, the original nonfiction book. Well, theoretically nonfiction, but I think the writer made up a lot of stuff about the New York underworld of the 19th century. I read a biography of Sitting Bull. I read a biography of Red Cloud. I read something about Irish liberation struggle people, bombers, Irish bombers in the 1880s and 70s. And it just kind of went on from there. And so then I just continued with the kind of chaotic reading. And one of the great things I read actually was I read a book by a Chicago newspaper reporter who, I guess we'd say in modern lingo, he was embedded with General Crook's column during the Great Sioux War of 1876-77. That's the one where Custer got wiped out, and he was with the column that wasn't at the Little Bighorn. So he wrote a book. He lived to write a book about his experience. So anyway, he's writing about day-to-day life in the army out in the West and how miserable it was. And they did have one small battle, but a lot of it was just miserable life of soldiers. And I learned that he talked about, he said that U.S. Army soldiers, 1870s, they had a piece of Army slang for wasting time in camp, and they called it robbing the dog. And I have this weird idea that they actually used a different verb, but you couldn't put that one in print in the 19th century. Yeah, so I really like that.
For some reason, one of the research bits that stuck out for me was that Daniel can get a roasted cob of corn from a corn girl who's selling corn on the streets for 1 cent. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. Yeah,
I don't know if that was actually the price, but I did find out about hot corn girls who were these street waifs, kind of like little match girls, who would, I think they would have a brazier of hot coals, and they would go out and sell corn on the cob cooked on the street. And in the Library of Congress, you can look up online and find the sheet music to a song called Sorrowful Katie or The Hot Corn Girl. And with your indulgence, I will sing you the opening bit. And I'm not sure if this is the actual melody, I just made this up. Mama sends me in the storm, friendless and alone, here to cry my new hot corn from the paving stone. Here, kind sirs, for pity's sake, buy for little Katie's sake. And then it goes on. So yeah, I didn't make that part up, but I did kind of guess at what the price would be.
So probably your publisher should now have like a little CD
Yeah.
that's tucked into the back with Bob singing his made
Yes.
up versions of a bunch of songs from the 19th century.
Yeah, I'm not good at sight reading, but it is actually, the sheet music's there.
That sounds like way too much research, Bob. So like, it could have gone on forever, right? I mean, that's the thing about
Yeah.
research. So how did you stop? Did Rosemary make you stop?
I mean, I didn't think there was the expectation one of these days I'd finish, but no, I mean, I was researching as I was writing, you know, so I mean, I'd be writing, and then I start Googling, you know, so there are, you know, websites about 19th century firearms, lots of websites about 19th century train history, the precursors to the modern automobile, you know, so looking at stuff like that. The thing that really threw me was clothing, especially women's fashions, looking up websites on 19th century clothing. I just was guessing, what do they call these things that people were wearing? You know, she was wearing a dress, but no, I think I tried to get actual words, but you know, so anyway, a lot of the research was just as I'm writing and I think, no, I got to get this thing finished. I don't know that I actually had a deadline, gave myself a deadline, but at some point, I think I said, I want to finish this thing and tried to speed it up, but Rosemary shook her head. I didn't have a deadline.
Another thing that this book has is action, and I'm really admiring of the way that you write action. So there's people on horses, and there's people in wagons, and you know, people on foot for great periods of time. How do you go about writing action? Because I'm no good at it, so I'm wondering.
Well, I would sort of define action as high stakes things happening very quickly, and with physical high stakes, not just emotional high stakes, because otherwise Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf would be an action movie. So you've got people moving around very quickly. So you've got to visualize the location where they're moving around and really think through how long is it going to take this person to get from here to here, and how long is it going to take this person to get from here to here. And if there are bullets flying, who has a clear view of whom, who could potentially shoot whom, you know, that kind of thing. It gets complicated when you've got several different people on different sorts of errands and they have to be able to rendezvous somewhere. So it's kind of like, you ask yourself, is it reasonable that this person's going to take this many pages to get from here to here, and this person, you know, can't get there ahead of them, so you got to give them some reason, you know. So yeah, it's sort of thinking of movement in time and space. I guess that's it. That's action. Action is movement in time and space.
I think Bob complicates things for himself just because that's what he can do. Do you have a favorite character in all these characters? Like I've said, I really like Lincoln, and I want to just say something about Lincoln in a minute, but do you have a favorite?
Well, I mean, I liked all three of the key protagonists, and I really tried to give them all equal time and equal attention. So the characters for me who kind of elbowed in, kept trying to steal the stage and get more time under the spotlight, were secondary characters who wanted to be upgraded. So Siegel, the wisecracker, kept wanting to be more and more part of the story and wanting to do more than just tell jokes. And I always enjoyed writing the Siegel chapters, or not Siegel chapters because there were no chapters just about Siegel, but writing the sections with Siegel in them. And then about halfway through, we introduced a young would-be reporter, Vera Bly. And I don't know that I ever visualized having her in there, but I came to identify with her in a way as somebody who's not the central, doing, you know, creating the central action, somebody who can observe the central action and by observing help to move it along, in some cases by accident. And having been a reporter myself, it was easy to kind of maybe identify with her in that respect. I was a reporter in small towns, and she's the daughter of a small town newspaper owner.
Yeah, and our bad guy, Josiah, the wolfer.
Yes.
I grew to have sympathy for him because I spent so much time with him, and I didn't want to because I just thought he was a jerk. But because, you know, I did have to spend time with him, and he was so lonely, so isolated. I had a smidgen of sympathy for him. But yeah, he's a son of a bitch. I want to come back to Lincoln. So Lincoln's father is great American folk hero, John Henry.
Yeah.
So who had a legendary, mythical, probably battle with a steam shovel, with a steam drill. That Lincoln's father, John Henry, could work faster than a machine. So it was a great. It's a great myth, great tall tale. And it does seem to me that you have a fondness for tall tales.
Okay.
I mean, this isn't, well, this has elements of tall tales. So, and I think maybe we don't pay enough attention to tall tales, their importance. I mean, can you talk a little bit about tall tales that you like? And
well, I mean, that is like the great American legend in a lot of ways. John Henry, he's a steel driving man. He's the guy with the big hammer who pounds the spike. And the guy with the worst job in the world is the guy who holds the spike, because if the steel driver misses, that guy's toast, right? And John Henry's super powerful, super strong, and he can drive that spike faster than anybody else. So one day, the captain, the guy in charge of the tunnel, says, "We're getting this steam drill, but we're going to see if you can pound that spike faster than a steam drill." And so in my novel, John Henry is Lincoln's father, and he has the chance to make $100 if he beats the steam drill. The steam drill people figure this is a great sales opportunity. And the story of John Henry is, of course, he dies. It wouldn't be much of a legend if he lived. Oh, he's faster than a steam drill. Okay. But it's such a powerful legend, I think, because it's got elements of Prometheus in it. It's got elements of Icarus in it. It's the dark side of technology, the dark side of invention, the cost of advancements, and I think a lot of these great legends have that. I mean, in the same period, you've also got the legend of Jesse James as a Robin Hood outlaw, and every second bank robber in the West eventually had a Robin Hood kind of label attached to him, and all the way through to the bank robbers of the 30s, Pretty Boy Floyd. There's a Woody Guthrie song about Pretty Boy Floyd, where supposedly he gave money to farmers to stop the banks from taking their farms away. And I bet you none of these guys ever did that. Or if they did do that, it was strategic. They need the farmer to, take them in at night, feed them, and they want the farmer not to tell the cops where they've been. So sure, they might give them some money from their gold haul. But so anyway, those legends too, they tie into those older legends, the Robin Hood legends, and really every culture has their good, bad guy legends. So yeah, I think sometimes those kind of legends, they live with, we don't have pantheons of gods anymore, but we still have legendary characters who are as important to us, and we keep reinventing them in new names.
Yeah. I'm going to give people notice that in about 30 seconds you can ask some questions and of Bob. So I just have one that will be the last one for me while your ideas are percolating, and that is writers of historical fiction that are working right now on historical fiction. It seems to me that there's a lot more in the States than in Canada. I mean, I would think that Guy Vanderhaeghe has definitely worked in this area in Canada, but are there particular writers of historical fiction in Canada or elsewhere that you admire?
Well, I just had an essay this spring in the Literary Review of Canada on the Canadian literary Western tradition. So I talk about Guy Vanderhaeghe, I talk about Fred Stenson, his novel The Trade, which I consider his strongest novel, and then Alex Hawley, a BC writer who did a pair of novels about Daniel Boone that reinvent this frontier hero. And again, the frontier hero this is an archetypal character, a legendary character. So many legends attached to Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett, how they, when they're 6 years old, they kill a bear with their bare hands kind of thing, which kind of harken back to Hercules. So Alex Hawley with her Daniel Boone novels, and Jill Adamson with her sort of late Western set in Alberta in the early 20th century, The Ridge Runner and the Outlander. And if you want a really dark historical fiction, Clifford Jackman, he's a lawyer turned novelist. His first novel was The Winter Family, about, I guess, a Western, also an Eastern, but mostly a Western, that's about really violence in politics, and its role in American history. And then he followed that up with a pirate novel which is really a kind of exploration of systems of government. And it's a kind of fictional treatment, or you could say a pirate novel inspired by Thomas Hobbes. Anyway, so here's a Canadian writer working in two different historical genres who I really liked.
Thanks, Bob. Has anyone in the audience thought of a question for Bob? John Taves will retell it. If you tell John, then he'll put it into his microphone.
And if anyone on YouTube also has a question, I know there's been a number of comments on the interesting historical facts that have been brought up during this conversation. So if any of you folks have any questions, please just type them into the chat.
People are watching on YouTube. Hello, YouTube.
So there was a question about publishing this book in the States rather than in Canada. Could you elaborate on the process, Bob?
Yeah, it was nobody in Canada was interested. I had an agent for my first book for a little while, and she tried to sell my first novel, and the big publishers were interested, but not that interested. And I think I like to tell myself it was because of the big economic collapse of 2008. They said, oh, we can't afford to publish books anymore, because that was around the time they said no. So anyway, she wanted to see my next book, and I sent it to her, and nah. And I sent it to some other agents, similar. I sent it to, I mean, I don't know that I sent it to the big Canadian publishers, because for the most part, the Canadian branches of international publishers, because for the most part, you can't do that if you don't have an agent. But I sent them to all the major independent publishers in Canada. I sent them to the people who published my first novel, who expressed specific interest in this one and never got back to me. This sounds bitter. They specifically said, we want to read your manuscript, and they never even acknowledged receiving it. So Rosemary's saying, no, that's enough. So anyway, Canada wasn't that interested. So I thought, well, it takes place in the States. So it's funny, with my first novel, it's a Canadian comic novel set in Canada. At one point, one of the Canadian branches of the American publishers asked, do you think this could be changed to the US? And I thought about it. I thought, oh, you know, I've never been, at that point, I'd never been to Minneapolis. But I bet you if I went down to Minneapolis and got some street names, I could do that. But I don't want to. And I don't think it would have worked anyway. But this time it's already set in the States. So, you know, I do mention Canada a few times. Madame Esther's from Canada. Angus McTaggart, the kindly engineer, talked about seeing a preliminary demonstration of a steam wagon in Quebec. Seth Bullock's from Canada. He mentions that. God, I sound bitter. I'm not.
Just telling it the way it is.
Yeah, yeah.
I think there was a question back there.
Yeah, Lauren.
Okay, I'll ask a question now. Is there a deadline?
Is there a deadline for the sequel?
Let's say, I'm going to give myself one. Let's say sometime, my birthday next year.
Okay.
Which is?
April.
Okay.
I won't be more specific than that. Yeah. I mean, theoretically, I'm a third of the way through the sequel.
Bob, I've known you for quite a while, and you don't take yourself seriously in all cases. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I know you're a humorist. And throughout this book, I kept seeing humor. But yet, it's not a funny book. I don't know if that's right to say. Maybe talk a little bit about how you were able to balance the fact that you don't take yourself seriously and you're humorous and writing a serious book.
Sure. So for the benefit of those folks watching at home, it was just a question about the fact that Bob is a humorist. And while this book does contain a lot of humor, it is not specifically a humorous book. Mostly just detailing how, or asking about how Bob balances those two parts of the writing process.
I think Bob thinks it's a funny book, actually. But
I mean, it's funny in places. I agree. It's, I mean, I think humor is serious, and serious things are funny. Not always, but humor is serious in that it's a response to the world, and it's a way of responding to the world that is often a very true way of responding to the world. Humor is what happens when you realize that your self-image is not the person in the mirror. Humor is when other people's images are revealed for what they really are. Humor is when you expect one thing and you get another, and you realize, why did I ever expect that other thing? That it's that gap between our expectations and what actually happens. So, I mean, if you look at, speaking of my peers, not name check T.S. Eliot, I mean, you look at Shakespeare, Hamlet, you know, you've got one of the bleakest speeches in literature, you know, what a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how etc. like an angel, and yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? You know, so this, and then a little later, you've got grave diggers joking about pox victims in the graveyard just before Hamlet shows up, just after Hamlet, just before, what's the order? Just before Hamlet shows up and sees the corpse of his jester. So this juxtaposition of tears and laughter is the human condition. So they go together, I guess. Salt and the sweet. Like a little bit of salt makes the watermelon more tasty.
Obviously, the humor is intentional. But you've made a lot of references, both of you, to mythology.
And so I'm wondering just how intentional those there's a whole it's an important aspect of American literature, the mythology of the American hero. And these three youngsters, young people, growing older and touring, in relation to these mythological concepts, how intentional was the actual mythological feeling and resonance?
How intentional was the mythological feeling and resonance in the book, particularly when it comes to the journey of the three characters?
I mean, I guess it's intentional just in the sense that I've always known that the journey is such a major part of American literature. You know, Hemingway's thing that all American literature is a response to Huckleberry Finn, or something. I think it was Hemingway said that, and I think I'm misquoting, but it's something like that. And so that journey, and really Huckleberry Finn, that there's a lot of journeys before that. You know, you go back to Odysseus, and there was that recent novel, Cold Mountain, 20 years ago, which was quite intentionally Odysseus in the Civil War. So anytime you're doing a journey, you're working with one of the oldest literary forms there is. And so on the one hand, you're telling the story because journey stories are cool, and we like road stories. I like road stories. But on the other hand, you're aware that, you know, the journey is one of the classic story forms. So I suppose you need to be a little bit aware of that. But if you were too aware of it, you might neglect the storytelling and get caught up too much in, okay, now I got to have this happen. I got to have a prophecy. I got to have, but so yeah, it's something that is both aware and turned off when necessary to get the story going.
Then we have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
Do you have any grand projects that are nipping at your heels?
Do you have any grand projects that have been nipping at your heels, Bob? Okay. I'm going to first ask, is anybody here a budding crime novelist? No hands? Okay, so nobody's going to steal this. My wife and I bought a trailer this summer, and so I've been thinking of this for a couple of years, you know, since the whole vanning craze came about, and before Nomadland came out, you know, and all that, I was thinking of the idea of a crime novel series about a guy who travels around in a van, and I was thinking tonally it might be kind of like Fletch, you know, the comedy mystery series from the 70s, which was made into a not very memorable Chevy Chase movie. So kind of like that, but in a van. Anyway, we bought this trailer, so we're traveling around. I have started work on a crime novel about an accidental sleuth who
throws it all away and goes and lives in his trailer and travels around. And not surprisingly, the first scene opens with him in a Wild West town. So that's one grand project, but the other one is really trying to get back to the sequel on this thing. I had the idea that there would need to be at least 3 because I got 3 main characters. And at one point I had the idea that they'll have to leave the US at some point. And I was thinking of cool places they could go and trying to ransack my, my travels. So any place I've been, I'm thinking, should they go here? Oh, maybe they should go here. So, yeah. Oh, I have a book of short stories, yes, that I'm trying to get published. It's also been bouncing around publishers unsuccessfully. And on our most recent trip, I came up with another short story idea, bouncing out of my travels. So yeah, if anybody would like to publish a book of short stories from many different genres, set in many different locations, some of which are comic and some of which aren't, you know where to go.
And some of which intend to be mythic and some don't.
Yeah.
But Bob is obviously a storyteller, so I'm just so glad that that this book is out after all of your long months and years of work. And congratulations, Bob. Commend this book to all of you. I'm sure you'll all have Bob sign it later. But yeah, thanks for inviting me to be part of this, Bob.
Oh, thank you so much, Sue. Big thanks to Sue. She is the best interviewer. Oh, thank you. Oh, now we get words from the area.
Words from your sponsor.
From the area.
Hi, my name is Ariel Gordon. I'm the publicist this year for the Winnipeg International Writers Festival. And we are so pleased to have offered this launch and to be a part of this launch. We're so pleased that Sue was here, and I think they both deserve another round of applause. I'd also like to thank John Taves, who's hiding behind the banner as we speak, for all of the work that he does. These events wouldn't happen without him. And McNally, isn't it wonderful to be back here? I'm going to briefly tell you about the other events that we have coming up next week. But I will let you know that as Bob tumbleweeds out to the signing table next to the cash desk, you just need to again put your masks on while exiting the space and then socially distance the moment you get over on the other side of the Great Barrier. You can purchase your books before getting into line or after having them signed. Just please to remember to pay for them before leaving. Because Bob will actually lasso you on the way out of the store if you don't pay for them. All right, so the 3 events we have coming up the next week. So Wob Canoe will be launching his YA novel, Walking in Two Worlds, which is tomorrow night here. And Tasha Spillett-Sumner, who is a great writer and graphic novelist, will be acting as the host in that case. Gary Thomas Morse will be launching his poetry collection, Scofflaw, which is, if you work in the media, that's a very very preferred headline word, scofflaws. I think we should actually all say the word scofflaw right now and see if Gary Thomas Morse hears us. So ready? 1, 2, 3.
Scofflaw.
Scofflaw. So MC Jude Drodry will be the host then, and that's Wednesday, October 6th. And then Colin Smith will be launching his Permanent Carnival Time, another collection of poetry, Friday, October 8th with Cam Scott, another great poet and employee here at the store. And finally, I kind of wanted to take your picture from up here because it looks kind of awesome. So if you wanted to wave or shake your fist or make rude gestures.
Yeehaw.
Yeehaw.
I guess you can't hear them. So.
No, you can't hear pictures, Bob. That technology's in the future. All right, and so thank you so much for coming. We're so glad to see you. Please do check out the Winnipeg International Writers Festival website, because that's where we have content from 60 authors. We have about 12 in-person events, these hybrid events, but there's an ocean of content over at the Thin Air Festival site. It's free. You should go look at it. And thank you so much.